Imagine standing at the edge of a dawn the world has never named. No cities, no voices, only wind sliding over stone and a thin veil of smoke drifting from a trembling fire deep inside a cave. A small band of beings, perhaps human, perhaps not yet, slowly steps into the light. They look to the sky, listen to the rustle of unseen creatures, and begin the longest day in human history. A day of survival, of discovery, of a newborn kind of thought. In that fragile moment, they do not know that every breath, every mark on the earth beneath their feet, will one day become the foundation of us all. Their story, thought to be lost in the silence of rock and ash, still whispers beneath every step you take. Because before we became humanity, there were those who dared to light the dark with fire and memory. And if you're ready, we'll go back, together, to where that first dawn began. If this kind of quiet wonder speaks to you, let your curiosity stay a little longer. Tap like, subscribe, or simply keep listening. Because somewhere between the firelight and the shadow, we may rediscover what it truly means to be human. Dawn. A soft light spills across the edges of a forgotten world. The wind moves through tall grass, brushing over stone and bone, over the faint footprints of a species that has not yet learned its own name. In the chill of that ancient morning, a few small figures stir near the mouth of a limestone cave. They move slowly, cautious and alert, every sense tuned to survival. For them, the day begins not with alarms or calendars, but with the fragile promise of warmth. Somewhere in the ashes of the night before, a dim ember still glows, a pulse of red light hidden beneath layers of charcoal. Someone kneels beside it, cupping their hands. A breath, a whisper of life, stirs the ember. Then another. The ember brightens, catches, spreads into the small miracle that has followed us ever since. Fire. That moment, repeated countless times over hundreds of thousands of years, is where our story begins. Before cities and gods, before language and memory, there was this. One breath shared between a creature and a flame. For early humans, the day always began with a struggle to keep that flame alive. Fire was not just heat, it was protection, community, light, and time itself. It marked the difference between the safe circle and the dark beyond it, between being prey and becoming the hunter. When we speak of the first day, we are not referring to a single sunrise in the past. We are speaking of an awakening that stretched across generations, a dawn that kept returning until it changed what it meant to be alive. Every morning they rose with the light. They checked the sky, the smell of the wind, the movement of the herds. They carried with them what mattered most, not tools or trophies, but knowledge. Where to find roots after rain, how to follow a trail through silence, how to coax flame from stone and breath. The first tasks were practical. Gather wood, fetch water, check the traps. Yet beneath those gestures, something deeper stirred, an awareness that the world responded to them. When they shaped stone, the stone obeyed. When they blew on an ember, it awoke. When they raised their eyes to the stars seemed to answer. It was in these small moments that humanity was born, not through grand inventions, but through a slow and intimate conversation with nature. Imagine that morning rhythm. The hunters move outward, quiet and lean, their eyes trained to catch the faintest movement of fur in the grass. The gatherers stay behind, searching the earth for seeds and roots, reading the language of plants without a single written word. Every step, every glance carried the weight of survival. But it was not just survival that defined them. It was attention, a way of seeing the world with total presence. For them, every sound mattered. The snap of a twig could mean food or danger. A cloud's shape might promise rain or drought. They lived not beside nature, but within it, woven into its rhythms as intimately as breath within lungs. Fire was at the center of everything. By day, it offered warmth. By night, it offered a sense of time. a moving clock of sparks and shadows. Around it, stories were told long before language took shape. A gesture, a glance, the first laughter, perhaps the first sense of us. It is hard to imagine now, in a world of constant light, what that first fire meant. To tame flame was to tame a fragment of the sun. To carry it was to carry power once reserved for the sky itself. In its glow, they cooked food. A transformation that would change the species forever. Cooked meat released more energy. Roots became sweeter, grains digestible. The brain, hungry for calories, grew larger, and with it grew imagination. A flicker of light reflected in their eyes, and perhaps, for the first time, they recognized themselves. Not as beasts, but as something that could change the world. When the hunting party returned, success or failure was shared alike. Meat was roasted, skins were stretched, tools were repaired by the fire's edge. Children watched and learned not through words, but through imitation, by seeing, touching, trying, failing, and trying again. Knowledge did not belong to one person. It moved through the group like a current of heat, passed from elder to youth, from mother to child. This was the birth of culture, not in temples or scripts, but in gestures repeated across centuries. The tilt of a wrist while striking flint, the way one chooses dry grass for tinder, the memory of which tree burns brightest, which stream never runs dry. Such details, carried in silence, built a continuity stronger than any monument, and in that continuity they began to find meaning. Evening brought a different kind of ritual. When the sun slipped below the horizon, they gathered once more around the circle of fire. Its light painted the cave walls in red and gold, flickering across stone like breath. It was there, perhaps, that imagination first took shape. A hunter tracing the outline of an animal on the wall, telling the story of the day through gesture and shadow. A mother humming softly to calm her child, creating the first lullaby. A child holding a glowing stick, waving it in the air, the first artist drawing light upon the dark. From such gestures, art was born. From art, memory. And from memory, identity. Fire was no longer just a tool. It had become a mirror, reflecting back the growing soul of humankind. When we, as modern people, look back on these first days, it is tempting to see only hardship. Cold, hunger, danger, endless labor. But beneath that struggle was something profoundly beautiful. The first partnership between mind and world. Every spark of invention we celebrate today, from the wheel to the written word, began with that moment when one creature learned to nurture flame instead of fear it. That was the first victory of curiosity over chaos. The first time the universe looked at itself and realized it could think. As night deepened, the fire's glow would fade to embers again. The group would draw closer, sleeping in a tangle of warmth and breath, listening to the quiet music of wind outside the cave. They did not know the words future or history. But each breath they took became a promise to both. The rhythm of their days, light, hunt, fire, rest, was the metronome of a species learning to endure. Every dawn that followed was another lesson in adaptation, another test of balance with the world around them. And through that long apprenticeship to the earth, they earned the right to call themselves human. For historians, this era, the Paleolithic, is more than a chapter in textbooks. It is the root system of everything we are. Language, art, compassion, technology, all trace their lineage back to those nameless mornings beside the fire. Even our myths echo it. Prometheus stealing flame, the sacred hearth of every civilization, the candle we light when we mourn or celebrate. Fire is both ancestor and symbol. It remembers us. So when we speak of the first day of humanity, we are not recounting a single moment frozen in time. We are tracing the slow dawn of consciousness. A dawn that still continues. Every time we strike a match, every time we share warmth, Every time we look at another human being and recognize ourselves in their eyes, we repeat that ancient gesture. We breathe life into the ember once more. It is humbling, isn't it? To realize that the distance between us and them is not so vast. That beneath the layers of technology and noise, we still live by the same rhythm. The rhythm of breath and flame. And maybe that's why stories like this still matter, because they remind us that progress did not begin with steel or code. It began with awe, with a creature who saw light in the darkness and decided to keep it alive. That is the oldest tradition we have, the quiet act of tending something fragile until it becomes strong enough to outlive us. So tonight, if you find yourself by a campfire, or even the glow of a candle in your room, pause for a moment, listen. In the crackle of flame, in the hum of heat, you might hear the echo of those first voices, the soft breathing of your ancestors. They are still here, in the warmth that wraps around you, in the breath that feeds the flame. You are part of their unbroken line. If this story has brought them closer to you, if you can almost feel the weight of that ancient dawn on your skin, then you already carry the same spark they did, the same wonder, the same need to understand. So stay with us. Keep listening. Let that quiet curiosity burn a little longer, because somewhere in the glow of every story we tell, the first fire still flickers. Imagine stretching time not by years, but by breaths. Now imagine those breaths echoing through millions of dawns and dusks, each one marking a life, a birth, a fire rekindled. That is the scale of the Paleolithic, the longest age in the human story. From roughly 2.6 million years ago until just 12,000 years past, the world belonged to wanderers, to small bands of humans who left almost nothing behind but stone, ash, and memory. It is strange to think about. Nearly 99% of our history took place before cities, before metal, before words etched into clay. For almost all of our existence, we were travelers on a living earth, guided not by maps or clocks, but by stars and seasons. The ice ages came and went like slow heartbeats of the planet. Glaciers advanced and withdrew. Forests turned to grasslands and back again. Across those ages, continents shifted, rivers carved new valleys, and the air itself changed. To survive, humanity learned to change with it. Adaptation wasn't an idea, it was the rhythm of life. In warmer epochs, groups followed the rains and herds. During glacial winters, they huddled close to the fire, wrapped in hides, listening to the wind scrape across frozen plains. What we call progress today was back then simply endurance. And yet, within that endurance, something remarkable was forming, a mind that could remember. They began to notice patterns. When the herds returned, when roots ripened, when rivers froze and thawed. Knowledge grew not in libraries but in bodies, in muscle, in instinct, in story. If we could walk among them, we might be surprised at what we'd find. Not mindless creatures struggling to survive, but people. Alert, creative, curious. They understood the land in ways we have almost forgotten. Every sound meant something. The shriek of a hawk told where rabbits might run. The smell of distant rain meant which valley to travel toward. They could read the earth the way we read screens, effortlessly, constantly. There were no borders, no nations, no ownership of the world. Only the endless conversation between hunger and generosity, danger and care. In that balance, they shaped the first human societies, small, mobile, and astonishingly resilient. Tools evolved as they did, from simple flakes struck off river stones to the elegant hand axes of Acheulean craft. These tools weren't crude, they were artful. Each flake struck with precision, each edge shaped by intuition honed over centuries. A hand axe made 500,000 years ago fits the human hand today as if it were made yesterday. It's a bridge across time, proof that our grip, our intention, our design have barely changed. With tools came trade. or perhaps the beginnings of it. A piece of obsidian found hundreds of miles from its volcanic source. A shell bead carried inland, away from the sea. Each was a quiet testament to connection, to humans meeting, sharing, moving, learning. Even then, we were building networks of meaning, long before the first roads. The climate sculpted the rhythm of their lives. When ice blanketed the north, humans followed the sun south. When warmth returned, they followed the herds north again. Migration wasn't a choice, it was a dialogue with the planet. These journeys were slow, generational. Grandparents walked the same trails their grandchildren would, guided by memory and the shapes of distant mountains. They learned that the world is vast but also circular. Everything returns if you wait long enough. And so the world turned. For 2 million years, life unfolded in that patient spiral. Species rose and fell, Homo habilis, erectus, heidelbergensis, neanderthalensis, each adding a thread to the long fabric of humanity. By the time Homo sapiens appeared, the stage had already been set. We inherited not just fire and tools, but a legacy of endurance, cooperation, and awe. The Paleolithic was not a single age, but a series of awakenings. The lower, the middle, the upper, each marked by the expansion of mind and method. The first to walk upright, the first to shape fire, the first to bury their dead with care, the first to paint the unseen onto stone. And through it all, time moved slowly, so slowly that what we call change was often invisible. 1,000 generations might pass before a tool became sharper, before a ritual found its rhythm. Yet in that slowness, a kind of wisdom grew, the understanding that creation takes time, and time takes patience. For modern eyes, such slowness seems unbearable. We measure progress in seconds, not centuries, but our ancestors measured it in survival, in the return of spring, in the laughter of a child, in the spark of fire that never quite went out. They didn't rush the dawn, they lived inside it. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson this longest age still whispers to us, that human greatness doesn't begin with speed, but with stillness. To live 2 million years as wanderers and caretakers required balance, empathy, and courage. We survived not by conquering nature, but by learning to listen to it. Sometimes I imagine the end of one of those long days. A circle of firelight glowing against the vast dark of a glacial plain. Children drowsing in the warmth, hunters quiet, sharpening spears for tomorrow. The air still, except for the hiss of wood in flame. Someone looks up. Above them, stars scatter across the sky. Uncounted, uncharted, burning silently for 1 billion years. Perhaps in that gaze was the first question, the first wonder. Why are we here? That question, the same one we ask today, might be the oldest fire of all. When we look back on that age, it's easy to think of it as primitive, a waiting room before civilization. But that view misses the heart of it. The Paleolithic wasn't a pause before progress. It was progress, drawn out, patient, vast. It taught us everything essential: to share food, to build shelter, to tend flame, to love, to remember. It gave us endurance, it gave us empathy, and it gave us time, 2.5 million years of it, to become who we are. So the next time you stand beneath a night sky, remember that it is the same sky they watched, the same moon guided their migrations, the same constellations shimmered above their fires. We are not so far from them. We are, in truth, only a few thousand sunrises away. The Paleolithic is not gone. It lives inside our hands, in our breath, in the way we instinctively gather close to warmth. It is the long memory of being human, the age that taught us how to endure, how to hope, and how to begin again. And I sometimes wonder, where are you listening to this from? What time is it in your corner of the world right now? It's strange, isn't it? We're speaking across thousands of years, across the silence of history, and yet we meet here, in this single fragile moment. you and I, connected by sound, by curiosity, by that same old spark that first lit the dark. If you find beauty in these slow questions, if they make you pause and breathe a little deeper, I'd be grateful if you'd tap like or subscribe. It helps this small signal, this whisper from the past, find its way to other curious minds. No pressure, of course, just an invitation. A faint footprint in the dust that, if you look closely, might lead somewhere unexpected. Those migrations were not journeys of conquest, but of endurance. They followed the edge of the ice as if following a living boundary between death and survival. Every step forward was a negotiation with the world. The cold could kill, yes, but it also revealed new lands, rich with game and untouched rivers. Each thaw brought renewal. Each freeze, a reminder of fragility. To modern eyes, these movements seemed desperate. Families trudging through frost, hunting by moonlight, building shelters from bone and hide. But to them, this was normal. The earth had always been unpredictable, and so they learned to move like water, patient, adaptable, unstoppable. When the air grew colder, they built deeper hearths and wrapped their shelters with layers of hide and earth. When rivers shifted, they followed the new current. When mountains turned barren, they found the forest's edge and learned its language. Adaptation was not their talent. It was their identity. The climate didn't just shape their bodies, it sculpted their imagination. When lightning set the forest ablaze, they learned reverence, awe for a power they could not control. When drought shriveled the land, they learned patience, how to wait for the rains and gather seeds against hunger. When the wind carved dunes and snow into patterns, they began to see meaning in the world's design. Perhaps those were the first metaphors, the earth whispering to them in symbols of wind and light. Long before gods had names, the weather itself was divine. Rain was mercy, fire was spirit, ice was judgment. And in every storm, they sensed a dialogue between the smallness of the human body and the vast breadth of the planet that sustained it. Ice ages were not single winters. They were epochs. Entire cultures rose and vanished within one long breath of the planet's shifting temperature. In the north, mammoths and woolly rhinoceroses roamed. In the south, crocodiles slept in swamps that would one day turn to desert. The earth was many worlds at once, a patchwork of climates that changed like moods, weaving together the story of survival. Archaeologists today find traces of that dance in the soil, ash layers marking volcanic winters, pollen buried in lakes that speak of forests long gone. Each stratum is a heartbeat, a record of the planet's moods. And through them all, the human presence persists, faint but steady, like a signature written in patience. Imagine one of those cold nights near the edge of a glacier. The stars above seem close enough to touch. A group huddles near the fire, smoke curling against the wind. They listen to the groaning of the ice, the creaks and sighs of a frozen world in motion. To them it must have sounded alive, like a giant breathing beneath the earth. Perhaps they told stories to explain it, of sleeping spirits or frozen beasts stirring below. In their myths, climate and life were one and the same. Even their art reflected this awareness. In caves like Chauvet and Altamira, animals twist and move across stone walls, bison, lions, bears, painted by firelight. But among them there are also signs of weather, streaks that could be rain, spirals like the wind, dots that resemble falling snow. They were recording not just what they hunted, but the world that shaped them. The cold hardened them, but it also connected them. To survive, they had to rely on one another, to share food, warmth, and warning. The hearth became the first classroom, the first council. Here they passed down stories of the storms, lessons of the hunt, and dreams of what might lie beyond the next horizon. In times of famine, they learned generosity. A shared meal was not charity, it was preservation of the group. And from that necessity grew something sacred. community. We often picture the Ice Age as loneliness, a few figures trudging through endless white. But perhaps it was the opposite. Perhaps it was the era when humans learned closeness, how to protect, how to share, how to remember together. As the world warmed again, glaciers retreated like slow-moving tides, carving valleys and lakes behind them. Forests returned, rivers burst forth, and the land filled with life once more. Humans followed, reclaiming old paths that had lain buried for centuries. They witnessed mountains revealing their bones, seas swallowing old plains. To live through such transformation was to know impermanence, to see creation and destruction as one breath. This was not tragedy to them, it was simply the nature of things. To adapt was to live in rhythm with a breathing world, one that demanded respect but also offered endless opportunity. Theirs was a wisdom born of movement. Never hold too tightly to the land, for the land itself will move. This shifting climate also reshaped the animals they depended on. Some vanished, the great mammoths, the saber-toothed cats, the cave bears. Others flourished, deer, bison, fish, birds. Each extinction forced a new idea, a new method, a new way to survive. Every disappearance was a lesson in reinvention. When large prey became scarce, they turned to smaller animals, traps, nets, and fishhooks carved from bone. When wood grew rare, they discovered how to use stone and sinew with greater skill. Necessity did not diminish their creativity, it refined it. The harsher the season, the sharper their minds became. Over tens of thousands of years, these cycles of cold and thaw shaped not only humanity's biology but its psychology. Fear taught awareness, scarcity taught empathy, and uncertainty taught faith, not in deities yet, but in one another. The greatest discovery of that era was not fire or the spear, but cooperation. A single person could not outlast the ice, but together they could find warmth even in a frozen world. That realization that survival depends on trust may be the oldest truth we still carry. It is astonishing to think that so much of who we are, our endurance, our empathy, our creativity, was carved not in comfort but in crisis. The planet tested us again and again, and each time we answered with innovation, with patience, with hope. Through storm and drought, famine and flood, humanity became not a species of dominance but of persistence. We are the children of instability, shaped by the earth's shifting breath, hardened by its cold, and inspired by its beauty. The Paleolithic climate did not break us, it forged us. If one could compress those millions of years into a single day, the morning would open in ice and wind, the afternoon in green and thunder, and the evening in stars reflected on newly melted lakes. In that brief, magnificent day, humans learned every lesson that would define them forever: how to bend without breaking, how to listen to the world, and how to kindle warmth in the coldest night. And though the glaciers are long gone, their memory remains. In our instinct to gather when storms come, in our fascination with firelight, in our quiet respect for the sky before rain. The climate was both our greatest enemy and our oldest teacher. It demanded resilience. And in answering, we became human. Morning always began with movement. Even before the sun climbed over the horizon, life in the Paleolithic world was already stirring. The smoke of an old fire curled through the mouth of a cave, thin and blue in the dawn air. A few embers still glowed, faint, stubborn hearts of light waiting to be fed. Someone rose quietly to coax the coals back to life. A few dry twigs, a slow breath, then warmth, crackling and familiar, the first success of every day. To live in that world was to belong to the rhythm of necessity. Nothing came without effort. Every morning began with the same quiet accounting: food, water, shelter, safety. Had the traps been checked? Was there smoke on the horizon that wasn't their own? Were there berries still clinging to the bushes after the frost? They did not plan by hours but by needs. The day unfolded according to hunger and light, by the pulse of weather and the memory of seasons. And yet, within that simplicity lay an intelligence we can barely imagine today, a kind of practical genius born not of books or machines, but of observation. A hunter's eyes could read a story written in the dirt. A single bent blade of grass meant something had passed here at dawn. A cluster of birds lifting suddenly meant danger or opportunity. Their knowledge of the land was so deep it became instinct. It wasn't learned, it was lived. When the men and women of that age left camp, they carried the whole world in their minds. They knew the flavor of every root, the pattern of every animal's track, the weight of a coming storm. Theirs was not a life of ignorance, but of intimacy with nature. The roles within their small communities were fluid. We often imagine men as hunters and women as gatherers, but the truth was far more complex. In a group of 30 souls, everyone's work mattered. Some hunted large game, others tracked smaller creatures, gathered plants, or tended the fires. Children learned by watching, mimicking the movements of their elders until skill became second nature. There was no separation between work and life, no boundary between necessity and meaning. To feed the group was not duty, it was existence itself. Each gesture, carving, cleaning, carrying, was an act of devotion to survival. Hunting was both art and ordeal. A hunt might last days, even weeks. They moved silently, barefoot over frozen soil, reading the earth for signs invisible to modern eyes. When they struck, it was with precision, a spear balanced perfectly for flight, a strategy honed by generations. And when the animal fell, it was not celebrated with cruelty. There was gratitude, a moment of recognition between hunter and hunted. They used everything, meat for food, hide for clothing, bone for tools, sinew for thread, fat for fire. Nothing was wasted because nothing was easy. Each life taken carried the weight of many lives sustained. But hunting was only one half of the story. Gathering, quieter, slower, endlessly patient, fed the group far more often. Women, children, and elders combed the landscape for nuts, berries, tubers, seeds. They learned the calendar of plants by heart, which roots ripen after rain, which berries poison the tongue. To know these things was to survive the winter. Their baskets, woven from reeds and bark, were as vital as spears. They carried not just food, but memory, the knowledge of where abundance would return when the season changed. And sometimes that knowledge meant the difference between life and extinction. By midday, the group would gather again. Smoke curled upward, carrying the smell of roasting meat and damp wood. The children played in the dirt, chasing each other around the fire. Laughter, rare but genuine, mingled with the sound of tools striking stone. Here, time slowed. Some repaired weapons dulled by use, others scraped hides clean or ground seeds into meal. It was labor, yes, but also community, a kind of quiet companionship that needed no words. The air was full of sound, the rhythm of stone on stone, the hum of conversation, the crackle of fire. It was the sound of civilization in its infancy. These people lived with a sense of constant vigilance, yet also of acceptance. They knew the hunt could fail. They knew storms could wipe out everything they had gathered. They did not expect fairness from the world, only opportunity. And when it came, they met it with readiness, with hands practiced in adaptation. A drought might drive them to rivers. A flood might send them into the hills. Wherever they went, they carried the flame of continuity, fire, memory, and skill, the three things no storm could take. With the late afternoon belonged to tools. Stone flakes flew in bright arcs, each one the product of skill measured by touch and sound. A single sharp edge could mean survival. They carved wood, bone, and ivory into spears, hooks, awls, and ornaments. Every creation bore both purpose and beauty, balance between function and grace. Even now, archaeologists marvel at the precision of their work. A spear point shaped 40,000 years ago fits perfectly into the human hand today. It is as if time itself paused for a moment, long enough for one person to perfect a gesture, and for that gesture to survive across millennia. As the sun dipped low, the group began to gather. The hunters returned, their silhouettes etched against the light. The smell of smoke thickened as fires grew bright again. Food was shared, always shared. No one ate alone. The meal was not simply nourishment, it was proof that cooperation worked, that the world could be harsh yet still generous. And as darkness fell, the days softened. The tasks of survival gave way to reflection, perhaps to the telling of stories. The flicker of fire painted the walls, and shadows became animals again, spirits dancing just beyond sight. Somewhere between the warmth of the flames and the chill of the night air, they must have felt what we still feel: the fragile comfort of belonging. For them, survival was not conquest. It was participation, a daily negotiation with the world, a dialogue written in sweat, breath, and silence. Every day was proof that endurance could be an art form, and that beauty could grow even from necessity. Their lives may seem simple to us, but simplicity was their genius. They understood that survival is not the absence of fear, it is the mastery of it. They lived by patience, by awareness, by a rhythm older than language. And in that rhythm, they discovered something profound, that the act of living itself, hunting, gathering, tending, sharing, could become sacred. When night came again, the last voices faded, leaving only the wind. The fires dimmed to red hearts of light. Someone would stay awake, tending the coals for morning. Another would cradle a sleeping child. Outside, the stars moved across the sky, the same stars we see now, though they never knew their names. The world was vast, cold, unpredictable. And yet, at the center of it all, a small circle of humans kept breathing, learning, enduring. That was their miracle. Not dominance, not invention, but continuity. To live, to try again, to pass the ember to the next dawn. And so the rhythm of survival continued, a rhythm that, even now, still beats quietly within us all. Evening shadows deepen across the plain. A faint wind moves through the grass, bending it in long silver waves. In the distance, dark shapes drift: reindeer, bison, maybe the silhouettes of mammoths moving like ghosts across the horizon. For the Paleolithic hunter, this was the hour of anticipation. The world was quieter now, heavy with the scent of dusk and danger. Every heartbeat echoed against the rhythm of the earth itself. To hunt was to listen, not only for the sound of prey, but for the pulse of the land that sustained them both. Hunting was never merely violence. It was ceremony. It was strategy. It was patience carved into instinct. Before the chase, the group gathered near the fire. Each tool was inspected, every spear balanced and sharpened with care. They spoke little, if at all. Words, when used, were soft, murmurs in a shared language older than speech. A gesture of the hand could mean direction. A glance could mean danger. Silence itself could mean readiness. The hunt began with breath, steady, quiet, controlled. Breath guided movement, and movement guided life. To lose control of either was to lose everything. They studied the wind first. If it shifted, the hunt waited. If it held steady, they began their slow approach. Low, deliberate, every step measured against the ground. The prey, grazing ahead, was both target and teacher. To take its life required understanding its habits, its fears, its grace. They learned these lessons early, from mammoths that moved in tight family circles, from horses that sensed danger in the tremor of a leaf, from reindeer whose migrations marked the seasons like a moving calendar. A successful hunt required not only strength but empathy, the ability to think as the animal thought, to feel its rhythm until hunter and hunted moved as one. Weapons evolved with that empathy. The earliest hunts were clumsy affairs, stones thrown, branches sharpened by fire. But over time, patience shaped precision. Wooden spears carved for balance and weight, stone points flaked thin enough to pierce bone, tools made not for brutality, but for efficiency. By the time of the late Paleolithic, their craftsmanship had become a kind of art. Spears perfectly weighted, throwing sticks that could spin through the air with astonishing speed. Later still, the spear thrower, the atlatl, extended the hunter's reach, turning muscle and will into flight. And when the bow appeared, it transformed everything. Distance became safety, skill became survival, and the hunt became quieter, deadlier, more deliberate. But hunting was never guaranteed. The world was unpredictable. Storms could erase tracks, herds could shift without warning. One misstep could mean starvation. Sometimes the prey escaped, sometimes the hunter fell. Every success came at a cost: time, effort, risk. This constant uncertainty shaped the human spirit more than any tool ever did. It taught resilience, humility, and the courage to try again. In failure, they learned cooperation. In cooperation, they discovered something greater than survival: trust. When the hunt was good, it was a celebration. They carried their prize home, the heavy weight of life now given, and the camp came alive with movement. Knives of flint flashed in the firelight. Hands worked quickly, skillfully, separating hide from muscle, bone from flesh. There was no waste. Every part had purpose. The heart might be eaten first, still warm, as a gesture of gratitude. The bones cleaned and shaped into tools or instruments. The skin scraped clean and stretched to dry, soon to become clothing, tents, drums. Even the sinews were twisted into thread, invisible yet strong. Each hunt, successful or not, bound the group closer together. It reminded them that no one could live alone, that life was a shared effort, a covenant renewed each time the fire burned. Fire, always fire. It was the silent witness to every hunt and every homecoming. It consumed the world's chaos and gave back warmth, order, light. To master it was to master time. Fire marked the boundaries of night and day, safety and peril, silence and song. They learned to feed it carefully. Too much wood and it raged, too little and it died. They learned its moods: the hiss of damp fuel, the crack of dry twigs, the steady hum of coals ready for cooking. And they learned to carry it. Wrapped in bark, kept alive through rain, guarded like the most sacred treasure. There is evidence from France, Israel, China, fire kept for generations, passed from one band to another. To lose it meant cold, darkness, vulnerability. To keep it meant continuity. Fire was not a tool, it was kin. Around the fire, life took on new color. Meat roasted, soft and rich. Bones cracked open for marrow. The scent of smoke clung to their hair, their skins, their memories. This was the first human hearth, the birthplace of community. They sat close, faces lit from below, eyes reflecting the flames. They shared food, stories, warmth, and silence. Children watched sparks fly upward into the dark and imagined spirits or stars. The first myths may have been born here, carried on the breath of smoke. By firelight, tools were repaired, songs whispered, wounds tended. The night, once a realm of predators, became home. Cooking changed everything. It softened meat, released flavor, made plants safe that were once deadly. It transformed the body too. The calories unlocked by heat fed the brain. The brain, in turn, imagined more uses for heat. It was an elegant cycle, one that led directly to the modern mind. The warmth of fire also shaped emotion. It gathered people together, encouraged patience, conversation, reflection. Around it, they learned not just how to survive, but how to be human, to speak, to dream, to remember. Sometimes, after the hunt and the feast, quiet would fall again. The group settled near the embers, their bellies full, their muscles tired. The fire dimmed to red, its light painting soft halos on the stone. In that hush, you can almost imagine what they felt. That strange peace born of exhaustion and gratitude. Perhaps they looked into the flame and saw more than light. Perhaps they saw themselves, fragile, fierce, endlessly curious. Fire was both mirror and mystery. It devoured and it gave, it destroyed and it created. In it, they recognized the paradox of their own existence. The relationship between hunting and fire defined the human condition. One taught the art of movement, strategy, courage. The other taught patience, nurture, and care. Together, they forged a balance between destruction and creation, a balance that would shape every civilization to come. Through the hunt, humans learned power. Through the flame, they learned responsibility. Each required the other. Without the hunt, there was no feast. Without the fire, no warmth, no light, no story. And between them stretched the entire spectrum of what it means to live. The chase and the stillness, the taking and the giving, the wild and the home. Long before writing, before temples and kings, before even memory had a name, the fire burned. Its smoke curled into the same sky that watched over us now. Its glow touched faces that could have been ours. And if we could stand beside them, those hunters, those keepers of the flame, we might realize that we have not changed so much. We still chase what we desire. We still gather where the light is warmest. We still look into the fire and wonder what waits beyond the dark. Because somewhere in the rhythm of the hunt and the heartbeat of the flame, we are still there, breathing, learning, surviving, alive. The human hand is small. It cannot outrun a predator. It cannot tear flesh like a claw, nor strike with the force of a hoof or fang. And yet within that small span of skin and bone lies the quiet secret of our survival. Because the hand remembers. It shapes. It transforms. In that memory, in that motion, humanity was born. Long before words, before even fire, there was the sound of stone striking stone. The first rhythm, the first invention, the first intention. A fragment chipped from a larger rock. A spark of purpose hidden within the noise. That simple gesture, one stone lifted to strike another, changed everything. It marked the moment when thought met action, when the idea inside the mind became something that could shape the world outside it. To make a tool was to say, without words, I can imagine what does not yet exist. The earliest tools were humble. Flakes of sharp-edged rock, heavy cores used for cutting or smashing. But in those crude beginnings was a miracle, the leap from reacting to creating. Homo habilis, the handy human, did not just use nature, he began to direct it. Over generations, this art deepened. By the time of Homo erectus, stone tools had become symmetrical, refined, balanced in both form and function. The Acheulean hand axe, a teardrop of stone perfectly shaped to fit the palm, remains one of the most elegant objects in human history. Each one was made by eye and instinct, no measuring tools, no plans. Yet its edges were sharp enough to butcher an elephant, its lines so precise that modern engineers still marvel at them. When you hold one today, it fits your hand as if it remembers you. As if your ancestors carved it knowing one day you would pick it up. Toolmaking was more than skill. It was communication. Each flake struck from a core was a message passed through time, evidence of thought, of intention, of care. A master craftsman could teach through demonstration. The lesson carried not in words, but in movement. A child would watch the tilt of the wrist, the angle of the blow, the patience between strikes, until repetition became knowledge. This was the first classroom. Not a cave, not a temple, but an open space filled with the ring of stone against stone. Learning was not an act of memorization, it was a dance of imitation. Through this ritual, the wisdom of hands became the memory of a species. Stone was the beginning, but never the limit. Wood followed, carved into spears, digging sticks, and handles. Bone and antler soon joined the conversation, offering strength, flexibility, and beauty. Each new material brought new possibilities, and with them, new ways of thinking. A hand that shaped stone learned patience. A hand that carved wood learned grace. A hand that polished bone learned subtlety, the awareness of texture, pressure, and rhythm. The mind and the hand evolved together, feeding one another in a quiet cycle of invention. To think was to imagine a tool. To build it was to make thought real. By the later Paleolithic, the toolmaker had become an artist. There were barons for engraving, scrapers for hides, needles carved from bones so fine they could stitch clothing tight against the cold, harpoons tipped with barbs to catch fish, awls to pierce leather, chisels to carve antler or ivory. Each creation spoke of a mind that could plan many steps ahead. These were not the products of accident or brute force. They were acts of design, born of observation, refined through generations. And with every new tool came a new possibility. A better spear meant a larger hunt. A sharper blade meant cleaner hides, warmer clothing, longer journeys. Progress did not roar. It whispered through the steady rhythm of creation. To understand the mind of the Paleolithic toolmaker is to witness the first engineer, the first artist, the first philosopher. Each blow of the hammerstone was both experiment and meditation. What angle works best? What sound means success? When does the stone surrender its secret? They learn through failure, through the ache of shattered flint, and the patience to begin again. And in that cycle of failure and correction, humanity learned something larger than craftsmanship. We learned persistence. We learned humility. Creation, it turned out, was not about control. It was about listening. Even today, when archaeologists study ancient tools, they can trace the maker's movements, the pressure of a thumb, the direction of a strike, the decision to stop just before breaking the edge. In those marks lies a kind of conversation across millennia. It tells us that they were not machines, they were artists, and that art was not for glory but survival. A well-shaped knife meant warmth, nourishment, protection, but it also meant something deeper. The satisfaction of mastery, the quiet pride of understanding the materials of the world. That emotion, that joy of creation, may be the oldest form of human happiness. As their tools grew more sophisticated, so did their imagination. The same hands that carved a spear point could carve a figurine, small, round-bodied forms of animals or humans. These objects had no clear practical purpose. They were expressions of beauty, of belief, of wonder. In carving, they discovered abstraction, the ability to see not only what is, but what could be. A bison drawn on a cave wall, a figure shaped from bone, each was an echo of something seen, remembered, loved, or feared. Art was the tool's twin, both born from the same hand, both guided by the same need to make thought visible. And so, as the millennia turned, the hand continued to teach the mind. Every tool reshaped not just the world, but the brain that imagined it. The more complex the tool, the more neurons fired, the more connections formed between movement and meaning. The hand built the mind as surely as the mind directed the hand. We often speak of evolution as something that happens to the body, but in truth, it was happening through these small, repetitive acts. Each strike of flint a spark inside the skull. The birth of intelligence was not sudden, it was carved, one edge at a time. Or, by the end of the Paleolithic, humans had created an entire vocabulary of tools, an alphabet of invention. From these gestures came agriculture, architecture, navigation, and art. The hand was the first language, its grammar was motion, its poetry was precision. Everything that followed, from the wheel to the pen to the stars we explore, began in that same rhythm, the lift, the strike, the shape, the pause. Oh, Rinnekorslet moment. If we could travel back to that moment, to stand behind one of our ancestors as they shaped stone in the golden light of an afternoon, we might see something quietly profound. The focus in their eyes, the slow exhale before a perfect strike, the small smile of satisfaction when the edge gleamed sharp in the sun. That moment, repeated 1,000 million times across generations, built our world. Not through power, but through patience. Not through dominance, but through attention. The first human genius was not the one who spoke, or painted, or ruled. It was the one who learned how to hold the world gently in their hands and change it. Night falls early in the Paleolithic world. The light disappears quickly once the sun dips beyond the hills, and with it goes the warmth. Wind sweeps down from the high plains carrying the smell of damp earth, smoke, and the faint echo of creatures moving in the dark. Somewhere beneath a limestone ridge, a small circle of humans gathers. The fire flickers, throwing shifting light onto the stone walls. Here, in this fragile ring of warmth, lies the first home. Not a house of timber or brick. Not yet, but something older, simpler, more sacred, a space where life dared to rest. To speak of home in the Paleolithic is to speak of belonging. It wasn't defined by architecture, but by presence, by the warmth of the fire, the smell of smoke clinging to hides, the heartbeat of those sleeping close by. Home was not built from materials, it was woven from memory. And yet, even in those earliest days, humanity began to shape the world around itself, to mark the line between the wild and the human. The first shelters were temporary. Windbreaks of branches, shallow pits lined with leaves, caves chosen not for grandeur, but for protection. They followed the rhythm of the seasons, building and abandoning, creating and returning. Each structure was a conversation with the landscape, an agreement between necessity and imagination. In the warmth of Africa, shelters were light and open, woven from reeds or grass, built to breathe. In the cold of Europe, they became solid, circular, fortified against snow and wind. Where caves were plentiful, they became sanctuaries. Where the land was flat and exposed, humans created their own stone horizons. Everywhere they went, they left traces, post holes in the ground, rings of hearthstones, fragments of bone and ash that whispered of community. Archaeologists once found in what is now southern France the remains of an oval structure nearly 400,000 years old. A circle of post holes marked its outline, each once filled with wooden stakes. Inside, the ground was blackened by repeated fires, the soil rich with bone fragments and charred seeds. This was not a mere campsite. It was a place where people stayed long enough to live, to dream, to call something ours. And in the cold plains of Ukraine, another discovery. Great circular dwellings built from mammoth bones, their entrances facing east toward the sunrise. Skulls, tusks, and ribs carefully arranged, walls covered with hides, floors layered with grass. These were not crude huts, they were masterpieces of adaptation. To build such a home required knowledge, cooperation, and vision. It was the first architecture of survival. Inside, the space was carefully organized. At the center, the hearth, the unblinking eye of warmth and safety. Around it, life unfolded in concentric circles of purpose. Closest to the fire, the old and the young, wrapped in hides, breathing the same air. Beyond them, the tools, stones laid out in careful order, bones stacked for future use, hides stretched to dry. At the edge, food storage, pits in the earth where meat could be kept cool, roots and nuts protected from the cold. Even here in this early world, there was structure, a sense of place, of order, of care. This was not mere instinct, it was thought. The same mind that shaped a spear now shaped space. The same hands that tamed fire began to tame chaos. Every home began as a response to fear. The cold, the dark, the predators that waited beyond the ring of light. But over time, the home became more than refuge. It became a reflection of something inward, of connection, of memory, of tenderness. In that dim, smoky air, families were born. Children grew up watching the dance of firelight on stone. Elders told stories, their voices soft and low like the wind at the cave's mouth. Here, laughter echoed for the first time, not as a warning or cry, but as comfort. For the first time, humanity felt the weight of staying. Outside, the world was vast and cold. Inside, the fire whispered continuity. The scent of roasted marrow, the murmur of breathing, the soft rustle of hide, all these became the language of belonging. When storms came, they listened together to the howl of wind and rain beating against stone. When snow fell, they dug deeper, building layers of warmth with earth and fur. When the stars reappeared after days of cloud, they stepped outside and watched in silence, the same stars that watched us now. In those moments, home became a bridge between the human and the infinite. The hand that once shaped tools now shaped comfort. The same mind that hunted for food began to hunt for stillness. Home was the pause between efforts, a reminder that life was more than endurance. Here, people learned to decorate. They hung bones polished to gleam, placed shells near the fire, painted with ochre on the stone walls. Not for survival, for beauty. The desire to make a space lovely, to mark it as ours, is among the oldest impulses we possess. Even in the harshest landscapes, they found color. A strip of red pigment smeared on stone, a feather woven into twine, a carved ivory bead worn at the neck. These were not luxuries, they were declarations. We are more than the world demands of us. Over time, the home changed shape but not spirit. Nomadic shelters grew into seasonal camps. Camps grew into villages, villages into cities. But the essence remained. Warmth at the center, walls to keep out the cold, stories to fill the silence. The architecture of the Paleolithic was the architecture of memory. It taught us to mark a place, to claim it not through ownership, but through care. It was never about walls, it was about meaning. When they left a dwelling behind, they didn't destroy it. They let the wind reclaim it, the grass grow through it, the earth fold it back into itself. Every shelter was both temporary and eternal, like the lives lived within it. What is most astonishing is not how these homes looked, but what they represented. For the first time, humans had carved out a space where nature and consciousness met. A home was not an escape from the world, it was an embrace of it. Shaped from its bones, warmed by its breath, watched over by its sky. In that meeting place, humanity found its balance. The home became the seed of civilization. The first place where time could linger, where thought could grow roots. Within those walls of bone and stone, something began to shift inside the human spirit. The need to stay, the will to protect, the desire to create a small, enduring world inside an endless one. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear it. The faint crackle of fire, the murmur of sleep, the soft rustle of hide against stone. The cave breathes with them, its walls glowing orange and gold. Outside, wolves pass through the snow, silent, unseen. Inside, the warmth holds. That is the miracle of the first home. Not that it kept the world out, but that it kept the human heart alive within it. It was more than shelter. It was belonging. It was the place where the earth, for the first time, felt like it could love us back. In the dim light of a Paleolithic morning, the fire still breathes softly. Smoke drifts upward, curling through the quiet air, carrying the scent of warmth and ash. Around it, shapes begin to stir, slow, deliberate, human. A mother bends over a child, brushing frost from their hair. An elder sits near the coals, rubbing life back into tired hands. The youngest crawl closer to the heat, pressing against one another for comfort. This, more than the hunt, more than the tools, more than fire itself, is what made us human. Not our strength, not our cunning, but our tenderness. The world then was harsh beyond measure. Every day was a wager against cold, hunger, and injury. And yet, even in that relentless struggle, we find traces of compassion. Small gestures preserved in bone and ash. Archaeologists have unearthed skeletons of individuals who lived years after crippling injuries, spines twisted, limbs deformed, teeth worn away. They could not have hunted. They could not have gathered. Someone must have fed them. Someone must have carried them when they could no longer walk. That simple act, one human caring for another without gain, may be the oldest proof of love on earth. In that ancient world, community was survival. Each band was small, 20 to 30 souls perhaps, bound not by borders or bloodlines alone, but by mutual need. Everyone had a role, and every role was sacred. The young learned by watching, by imitating the rhythm of the elders' hands. The strong hunted, the patient gathered, the skilled shaped tools. The elders remembered. Age was not a burden. It was a library. In their stories lay maps of rivers, seasons, and storms, knowledge carried not on parchment, but in memory and voice. When the body failed, the mind still served. Wisdom became its own kind of strength. Children were the fire's other miracle. Their laughter echoed against cave walls, bright and strange in a world so often ruled by silence. They were the reason to gather wood, to build shelter, to hope for tomorrow. And though childhood was brief, a handful of years before responsibility took hold, its presence changed the rhythm of life. Parents taught through gesture. A hunter would guide a child's hand to a stone, showing how to strike the right angle. A gatherer would point to a plant, whisper its name, its taste, its danger. These lessons were not taught once, they were repeated until they became instinct. This was the first education, lived, not spoken. The earth itself was the classroom, the family its heartbeat. But care extended beyond blood. A child without parents could still survive within the band. The concept of ours outweighed mine. The hearth was communal. Food shared freely. In this way, kinship grew not only from birth, but from belonging. To be human meant to be held within a circle of others, to be part of something larger than fear. And from that belonging came empathy. The ability to imagine another's pain, the desire to ease it. That instinct would one day grow into medicine, into art, into everything that makes civilization possible. But here, at its origin, it was simple. A hand offering food, a voice humming softly through the night, a presence that said, "You are not alone." When illness came, they turned to the earth. Herbs crushed between stones, clay smeared on wounds, cool water poured over burns. These were the beginnings of healing, knowledge born of observation and hope. Some learned that certain plants dulled pain or calmed fever. Others discovered that smoke from burning leaves could cleanse a wound. Each success became part of the collective memory, stored not in writing, but in ritual. Healing was not separate from spirituality. To care for the body was to honor life itself. And in a world where death walked close beside them, every moment of healing was a kind of defiance. There is tenderness even in how they buried their dead. Evidence shows bodies laid carefully in shallow graves, often curled as if sleeping, sometimes with tools or shells placed beside them. Red ochre, the color of blood and sunset, was sprinkled over the remains, a gesture that spoke of reverence. They could not explain death, but they recognized its weight. In that recognition lay the birth of grief, and perhaps of the soul. Imagine them gathered around a grave, the fire flickering, the night wind carrying smoke through their hair. No words, no prayers as we know them, but silence, heavy, human, shared. That silence is our inheritance. To live so close to loss must have taught them to cherish fiercely. A single wound could end a life. A sudden storm could take the whole band. So they learned to hold one another tighter, to share the warmth, to keep the flame alive not only in the hearth but in the heart. Love in those days was not a luxury. It was a form of resistance, a declaration against the cold and the dark. I will care for you even when the world does not. And perhaps this is why, even now, the human instinct to nurture feels ancient. When we comfort a child, when we tend to the sick, when we sit beside someone in silence, we are repeating gestures millions of years old. We are reenacting the oldest ritual of all, the act of staying. The first home was not stone or hide. It was the space between two people who refused to abandon each other. That, more than tools or fire, may be our truest invention. In the glow of the Paleolithic fire, care was both physical and spiritual. It mended bodies, but it also held spirits together. It said, "We belong to one another." And from that belonging grew language, art, and faith. A mother's hum might become a song. A gesture of comfort might become a dance. A mark on a cave wall might become remembrance. Kindness was the seed from which every other human miracle would bloom. When the night deepened, they slept close, breathing the same air, hearts beating in time with the crackle of embers. The fire's glow painted their faces in gold and shadow, a portrait of unity older than civilization. They did not know that this tenderness, this habit of care, would one day define a species. But perhaps somewhere in that vast and frozen world, one of them understood, not in words but in feeling, that survival was never meant to be solitary, that the hand reaching out in the dark is what kept the light alive. Night falls like a curtain drawn by unseen hands. The fire burns low, its glow trembling across the walls of a cave. A cathedral of stone, silent, timeless, waiting. And then, almost imperceptibly, movement. A figure steps forward, carrying a burning branch. The light spills over the rock and reveals something extraordinary. Colors, lines, shapes, the first whispers of art. The wall breathes with motion. Horses mid-gallop, bison charging, mammoths turning their heads as if caught between worlds. It is not mere decoration, it is remembrance. It is worship. It is the soul of humanity, learning to speak without words. Long before the first city rose, before language had settled into syntax, there was art, the language of the unseen. It began perhaps with a single handprint pressed into the stone, red ochre staining the rock like a signature. I was here. I lived. I dreamed. To paint was to defy time. To carve, to sing, to mark. Each gesture said that life was more than survival, that it had rhythm and pattern and beauty. The first pigments came from the earth itself. Hematite ground to red dust, manganese to black, ochre to gold. Mixed with animal fat or water, they clung to the walls like memory, glowing faintly in the light of the fire. Fingers became brushes, feathers, reeds, and bones became tools. The hand became both instrument and voice. Every stroke carried intention, a bison's flank, shaded with ash and flame. A horse's mane, drawn in the curve of a fingertip. Even the placement of the paintings mattered. They were not scattered randomly, but arranged according to some unspoken rhythm. Perhaps a story, a season, a prayer. In Lascaux, in Chauvet, in Altamira, the same hand seems to echo, not the same person, but the same yearning, to fix the fleeting, to make life endure. It is easy to think of these works as art in the modern sense, as aesthetic expression. But to their creators, they were something deeper, rituals carved in color and shadow. Each image may have been an invocation, a dialogue with the forces that governed their lives. A painted bison could summon luck for the hunt. A horse running across the stone could ensure the herd's return in spring. An outline of a hand could call upon ancestors to remember and protect. To paint was to reach beyond the visible world, to touch something sacred. It was not art for the eye, but art for the spirit. And art did not live only on stone. It lived in movement, in sound, in the body. Long before instruments, there was rhythm. The beat of hands against hollow logs, the slap of bone on skin, the pulse of heart within chest. Music was not composed, it was found, hidden in footsteps, in breath, in the crackle of flame. A hunter sharpening his spear might hum softly to the rhythm of his strokes. A mother might murmur to calm a frightened child, her voice blending with the night wind. A group might chant together before the hunt, their voices rising and falling like waves. These sounds, simple, instinctive, were the seeds of song. In time, the voice became instrument, and the instrument became extension of the voice. Flutes carved from bird bones, delicate, precise, capable of melody. Drums made from stretched hide over hollow wood. Rattles of shells and seeds that echoed like rain. Each note carried more than music, it carried connection. Music was a shared breath, a unifying pulse that turned individuals into one body. It gave rhythm to work, courage to fear, and beauty to silence. The caves themselves were chosen for their sound. Some chambers echo like cathedrals, others amplify whispers until they tremble in the bones. To stand in such a place, surrounded by painted beasts and flickering light, and to hear a note rise, that must have felt like speaking to the universe itself. Perhaps they believed the echoes were spirits answering. Perhaps they were right. Music and art were not luxuries of peace. They were born in hardship. They were survival in another form, not of the body, but of the mind. In a world that could freeze you, starve you, erase you, creativity was defiance, a refusal to let existence pass unnoticed. To sing in the dark was to say, we are still here. To paint on stone was to say, we will be remembered. These acts made life larger than its boundaries. They transformed fear into rhythm, hunger into melody, grief into color. Consider what it meant to create beauty when beauty offered no reward, no wealth, no power, only meaning. That perhaps was the first revolution. The moment when survival met imagination, and something ineffable was born. The moment when humanity stopped being defined by what it needed and began to be defined by what it loved. Art also became a way of teaching. A painted hunt might show children how animals moved, where to aim a spear, how to read the landscape. A rhythmic chant might help remember the steps of gathering or the timing of seasons. Through rhythm and repetition, knowledge became memory, and memory became culture. Each generation added its voice to the chorus of the past, not through writing, but through performance. A living archive carried in breath and gesture. Somewhere along this long journey, the line between ritual and expression blurred. The hunter's chant became a song. The storyteller's gesture became a dance. The painter's hand became prayer. And in that merging, the human spirit found its truest form, creative, curious, compassionate. Imagine the scene. A circle of firelight in the mouth of a cave. Men and women gathered close, faces glowing red and gold. An elder begins to sing, a melody low and deep rising like smoke. Another joins, then another, until voices weave together into something that feels ancient and eternal. The walls around them seem to breathe. Shadows of painted animals leap in rhythm with the song. For a moment there is no fear, no hunger, no cold. Only the shared vibration of sound, the heartbeat of belonging. That was music's first gift. Unity. It took many voices and made them one. Then came storytelling. Not yet with words as we know them, but with tone, with gesture, with firelight and eyes. A hunter recounting the day's chase through movement. A mother inventing creatures of shadow to amuse her child. An elder describing stars and seasons, marking time through tales. Story became the thread that tied the past to the present. Through it, the dead lived on, and the unborn were prepared. It taught, it warned, it consoled. It made experience communal. The storyteller was the first historian, the first poet, the first teacher. Their voice was the bridge across generations. Why did humans create art and song? Perhaps because the world was too immense to bear in silence, because beauty offered shelter that no cave could provide, because sound and color were the only ways to speak to what we could not name: fear, wonder, love, loss. To sing was to make the invisible visible. To paint was to capture what the body could not hold. And in doing so, they began to build something far greater than survival. They began to build meaning. Even now, when we hum unconsciously while working, or trace patterns in the sand, or watch firelight dance on a wall, we are repeating the gestures of our ancestors. We are remembering, in ways our minds may have forgotten, that art is not something we invented. It is something we inherited. Every brushstroke, every note, every heartbeat of rhythm is a fragment of that original conversation between humanity and the world. A dialogue that began not in galleries or concert halls, but in darkness, in hunger, in awe. The great paradox of that era is that they had almost nothing, yet created everything. With no words, they composed songs. With no tools beyond stone and bone, they captured life in motion. With no promise of tomorrow, they built eternity upon the walls of caves. When we look at those paintings today, or hear the delicate tones of a reconstructed bone flute, we are not just studying the past, we are hearing ourselves. The same breath, the same pulse, the same longing that still moves through us when a song stirs our hearts or a painting holds our gaze. Art and song, two wings of the same ancient bird, taught humanity to rise above necessity. They gave us flight in a world bound by gravity. They made time bearable, death meaningful, and silence beautiful. From the first pigment smeared on stone to the first note blown through bone, they carried one truth forward through the ages: that life is not enough. We need wonder. We need expression. We need to remember. And so, in that vast and uncertain world, beneath skies full of stars they could not name, our ancestors sang. Their voices echoed across valleys of snow and fields of grass, blending with the howl of wolves and the rush of wind. Their songs rose like smoke into the night, carrying the essence of what it meant to be alive. They sang not for audience, but for existence. Not to be heard, but to belong, to each other, to the world, to the mystery that made both possible. And as the echoes faded into the dark, perhaps they felt, as we sometimes do in music or art or love, that strange, fleeting certainty that even in a vast, cold universe, we are not alone. Dawn returns, pale and cold, over a land that has seen both tenderness and blood. The wind moves across the valley, whispering through grass that hides the bones of 1,000 forgotten stories. In that silence lies one of the oldest truths of our species: that even in the beginning, when the world was new and vast and unclaimed, humans already carried within them two opposing fires: compassion and conflict. They lived by sharing food, warmth, memory, but they also defended what they loved. They gave freely, yet they drew boundaries. They could nurture with their hands, and with the same hands, take life. The Paleolithic world was not a paradise. It was fragile, dangerous, and full of competition. But within that danger grew understanding. That peace was not the absence of struggle, but the art of surviving it together. The evidence, scattered across millennia, tells a story more nuanced than myth. We find bones with healed fractures, signs of care. But we also find skulls bearing the marks of violence. Fractures not healed, blades that met flesh. Conflict, it seems, is as old as community itself. Why did they fight? Not for greed or empire. Those would come later. Their battles were smaller, closer, rooted in hunger, fear, and the instinct to protect. Two bands might clash at a river crossing, one group claiming the right to water, the other defending their hunting ground. A stranger approaching a camp might be seen as both threat and opportunity. In a world of scarcity, every meeting balanced on a knife's edge between friendship and danger. And yet, even amid those tensions, there was restraint. The violence of the Paleolithic was rare, not constant. It was not an endless war, but a momentary break in the rhythm of cooperation. For every wound carved by conflict, there are 10 acts of care, of mending, of generosity. The same species that learned to kill also learned to comfort. The same brain that plotted a hunt also planned a burial. Violence did not define them. It reminded them of the cost of forgetting their humanity. Imagine a small group crossing an unfamiliar plain. The sky is gray with coming snow. In the distance they spot another band, shapes moving against the horizon wrapped in furs carrying spears. For a moment there is stillness. Who are they? Kin or rival? The air tightens, hands grip weapons, hearts quicken, and then perhaps a sign, a gesture, a shared sound, the universal language of caution. They pause, they lower their arms. Slowly, step by step, they approach. A gift of meat, a glance exchanged, a fragile truce born out of mutual exhaustion. It must have happened countless times, strangers becoming allies, competition turning into kinship, because survival demanded it. The world was too vast, too cold for endless enmity. The price of isolation was extinction. To survive, they learned the art of negotiation. Cooperation became their most powerful weapon. There is evidence that groups met to share resources, exchanging stone from distant quarries, shells from the coast, pigments from unknown rivers. These were the first trade routes, not marked on maps, but carried in memory, in footsteps. Trade was not just practical, it was peace made visible. To give something to another band was to say, I trust you, I acknowledge you. In return came safety, information, friendship. The roots of diplomacy were born beside the fire. But conflict never vanished. Sometimes scarcity outweighed kinship. A drought, a failed hunt, a harsh winter, and fear would return. A single spark of misunderstanding could unravel months of trust. A theft of food, a perceived insult, an accident mistaken for aggression, each could ignite anger. Perhaps a hunter's spear struck the wrong animal, one marked by another clan. Perhaps a child wandered too near a rival's camp. In those moments, pride and protection outweighed reason. Shouts echoed, weapons flashed, the night erupted with chaos. And then, just as swiftly, silence. After conflict came grief. After grief came learning. They would carry the memory of it forward, the awareness that anger, once loosed, consumes more than it defends. The Paleolithic mind was not primitive in emotion. It was raw, immediate, and deep. They loved fiercely, mourned openly, and feared greatly. Every bond was fragile, every loss immense. To fight, for them, was not sport or glory. It was desperation, the last resort of creatures trying to protect something irreplaceable. And that instinct, tragic and sacred, was the beginning of morality. Because from violence came remorse, and from remorse, conscience. Archaeologists have found burials where individuals killed in conflict were laid to rest with care, not discarded. Even the fallen were given ritual, as if their killers understood that death demanded respect. They could not yet speak of justice, but they felt its weight. In their quiet, instinctive way, they began to shape the ethics that still govern us, that life has value, that killing changes the killer, that peace, when found, must be tended like a fragile flame. There is a haunting thought. Perhaps the first peace treaties were made not with words, but with gestures, an open hand, a shared fire, a meal. The act of breaking bread or roasting meat together may have been the earliest ritual of reconciliation. When one group allowed another to sit beside their fire, it meant trust, and in a world where trust could mean life or death, that was no small thing. Fire, once again, became the bridge. It illuminated faces, melted fear, softened suspicion. To share its warmth was to acknowledge shared humanity. But even within the same band, conflict simmered. Not all quarrels came from the outside. Jealousy, leadership, the tension between generations. We tend to imagine small groups as harmonious, but they were families, and families are rarely simple. A decision to move camp, a disagreement over hunting rights, an accusation of laziness, each could strain the fragile unity that survival required. The oldest might resist the ideas of the young might challenge the authority of the old, and so they learned compromise, not through law, but through empathy, through the awareness that survival depended not on dominance, but on balance. Perhaps that is where the roots of society lie, not in grand design, but in the quiet, daily act of choosing understanding over anger. There were, too, invisible conflicts, not of weapon or territory, but of belief. As human awareness deepened, so did imagination. Dreams, visions, and symbols began to shape how they understood the world. One group might believe the spirits of animals required certain rituals before a hunt. Another might follow different customs. When they met, these unseen differences could create tension or curiosity. But even here, conflict gave birth to culture. When beliefs clashed, ideas spread. Rituals evolved. Art flourished. From disagreement came diversity, the seed of civilization's endless complexity. And yet through it all, compassion persisted. For every act of violence, there was an act of mercy. For every fracture, a healing. The two forces, conflict and kindness, danced together like shadow and flame. They learned that to harm another was to harm themselves, that the scream of pain, the sight of loss, left an echo in the soul that could not be silenced. That echo was conscience, a fragile invention as vital as fire. When we look back on them now, those first humans walking the line between survival and destruction, it is easy to judge, to imagine them as either noble savages or brutal primitives. But they were neither. They were us, unfiltered. Every emotion we feel, love, jealousy, grief, rage, forgiveness, burned in them just as fiercely. They too wrestled with choices. They too hesitated before striking, regretted after, longed for peace, feared solitude. They were learning, slowly, painfully, what it meant to be responsible for one another. That learning has never ended. If we listen closely to the silence of prehistory, we can almost hear their voices, not of war cries, but of reconciliation. The sound of two groups sharing a fire after conflict, the murmur of apology in a language long forgotten, the sigh of relief when peace, however brief, was restored. These are the moments that kept humanity alive. Not the battles, but the truces. Not the victories, but the forgiveness that followed. The great paradox of the Paleolithic is this. Our ancestors survived not because they were violent, but because they learned when not to be. Strength alone could not conquer the elements. Only compassion could hold the group together through famine, cold, and loss. Conflict was inevitable. But the choice to heal, that was human. It still is. In the end, perhaps this is what defines us. Not our tools, not our art, not even our intelligence, but our capacity to face our own darkness and still choose the light. The hand that once struck in fear learned also to reach in forgiveness. The same hand that wielded a weapon built shelter, tended wounds, and cradled the newborn. That is the hand that shaped the world. If you walk today through a museum, past the bones and stones that mark their time, pause before the fractured skulls, the mended bones, the traces of ochre on a rib. See not only violence, but tenderness. See the full story of what it meant to be human, to love, to lose, to hurt, to heal. Because in those quiet relics lies the heartbeat of our beginnings, a species learning, again and again, that the price of conflict is memory, and the reward of mercy is survival. The morning mist lies heavy over the plain. Each blade of grass holds a trembling drop of water, tiny mirrors reflecting a vast sky. Somewhere nearby, a child bends down to touch one, and in that small gesture, a truth older than civilization reveals itself. Humanity began not as conqueror, but as student. Long before we tamed the soil, before we measured the rain or named the constellations, we listened. We watched. We learned. The earth was the first teacher, and our ancestors its most attentive pupils. To live in the Paleolithic world was to be immersed in a web of relationships. The air carried news, the river spoke in tones of current and color. The soil told stories of what had passed and what was yet to come. Every living thing was both neighbor and lesson. They didn't have the word ecology, yet they lived it with every breath. Each decision, to hunt, to move, to burn, to rest, was an act of balance, a conversation between need and consequence. In that balance lay survival, and from it, a kind of quiet genius was born, the wisdom of the ecological mind. We often think of them as primitive, but in truth they were scientists of a kind we can hardly imagine now. They read the world not through symbols on paper, but through direct experience, a language of scent, taste, texture, sound. The whisper of wind in pine needles could foretell rain. The rhythm of frog calls marked the flood's approach. The color of moss on stone revealed direction. Every pattern mattered. Every change had meaning. To forget, even once, could mean death. Their knowledge of plants was astonishing. They knew which roots healed and which poisoned, which leaves soothed burns, which bark could cure fever. They learned through centuries of trial and error, storing discoveries in story, gesture, and song. A mother teaching her child a plant's name was not passing trivia, she was passing medicine, memory, and continuity. But their knowledge extended far beyond plants. They understood animals not just as prey, but as fellow travelers in the great cycle of life. They watched the migration of herds, the nesting of birds, the trails of insects through grass. They learned that each creature had a purpose, each action a consequence. When they hunted, they followed rules, invisible, moral, ecological. Never take more than needed. Use every part. Honor the spirit of what gives its life. To break that balance was to risk famine, or worse, the loss of respect between human and world. This was not superstition. It was wisdom born of observation. They understood that abundance was fragile, that generosity from nature required restraint from humanity. Fire, their oldest ally, became their most sophisticated tool of ecosystem management. In places like Australia, Africa, and North America, controlled burns were used not for destruction, but renewal. They learned that when fire was guided, lit in patterns at the right time, the land revived. New grass grew. Animals returned. Seeds hidden in soil awakened. They turned flame into a dialogue with the earth, a partnership between destruction and creation. The same wisdom would later echo through indigenous cultures worldwide. The understanding that to live with the land, one must occasionally help it breathe. Water, too, was sacred. They followed it like a thread through time: rivers, springs, glaciers, rain. They built their lives around it, memorizing every bend, every season's rise and fall. When the rivers changed course, they changed with them. They did not fight the current, they followed it. In this, they learned one of nature's deepest lessons. Permanence is an illusion. The world is movement, and to endure, one must move with it. This ecological intelligence extended to the sky. The stars were their first compass, the moon their calendar. They noticed how constellations shifted with the seasons, how certain stars rose when herds began to migrate, or when certain fruits ripened. The night sky became their map, their teacher, their clock. By reading the heavens, they learned to predict the rhythm of the earth. It was an exchange of faith and knowledge, an understanding that everything, from river to flame to starlight, was connected. They didn't separate themselves from nature as we do today. They didn't stand above it or outside it. They lived within it, as one voice among many in a vast and ongoing symphony. Theirs was not dominion. It was dialogue. When they walked through forests, they moved quietly, not out of fear, but out of reverence. When they killed, they thanked. When they harvested, they left some behind. When they left a place, they returned it to balance. They lived by reciprocity, the law that what you take, you must also give. Even their myths reflected this harmony. Animals were not symbols of evil or chaos, but of wisdom. The raven, the wolf, the bear, the serpent, each carried lessons, each served as bridge between worlds. Nature was not an enemy to be subdued, but a language to be learned. In their stories, rivers could think, mountains could remember, trees could feel. To us this may sound poetic, to them it was simply true. Because they saw no boundary between the physical and the spiritual. The world was alive, conscious, intertwined. Through this worldview, they achieved a kind of sustainability we still struggle to rediscover. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans lived in balance with the planet. They left no cities to crumble, no fields to exhaust, no oceans to choke with waste. When they moved on, the earth healed behind them. Their footprints vanished into grass and wind. They knew how to belong without owning, to use without ruining, to survive without domination. It is easy to romanticize this, to imagine an age of perfect harmony. But it was not harmony by choice. It was harmony by necessity. The earth was unforgiving, and they learned respect through hardship. That respect became their wisdom. In the remnants of ancient campsites, scientists have found traces of seeds, bones, shells, pigments, fragments that speak of a mind tuned to its environment. A mind not content merely to endure but to understand. They were not passive. They experimented, they innovated, they managed landscapes, burned fields, dug water holes, built traps that shaped the flow of rivers. They were already engineers, but their engineering followed the laws of nature, not the ambition to defy them. They understood something we have almost forgotten, that control and harmony are not the same thing. Imagine one of those evenings, the last light fading over the savanna or tundra. The group sits together, fire flickering, the scent of smoke and roasted roots in the air. Someone points to the horizon, a distant storm, a migrating herd, a pattern in the clouds. They talk quietly, deciding where to go next, how to follow the rhythm of the season. No maps, no measurements, only trust in memory and instinct. That was knowledge. Lived, shared, passed hand to hand, voice to voice. Knowledge that could not be written down but could never be erased. Today we call it traditional ecological knowledge. But to them it was simply life, the art of listening. They listened to birds before they hunted. They listened to the soil before they dug. They listened to silence itself, and from that silence they learned humility. Humility, that rarest of wisdoms, was the foundation of their survival. They knew they were small, yet connected to something vast. They did not ask, "What can I take?" They asked, "How can I remain?" Perhaps the most moving proof of this lies in their art. The cave paintings, carved figurines, and ornaments of the Paleolithic are not simply aesthetic, they are ecological memory, portraits of the world as they knew it. Every animal, every plant, every swirl of pigment tells a story of coexistence. There are no depictions of conquest, no scenes of dominance. Instead, the creatures are graceful, alive, revered. They share the walls as equals, painted with the same care, the same beauty. It was art as gratitude, art as remembrance, art as ecology. Theirs was a wisdom written not in words but in rhythm, the rhythm of migrations, of seasons, of breath. It flowed through them, as natural as heartbeat. It taught them that everything returns, that decay becomes soil, soil becomes life, life becomes song. They knew, in a way we are only beginning to rediscover, that we do not live on the earth, but within it, that we are not separate from its cycles but expressions of them. And now, thousands of generations later, we walk on their same ground, though we rarely feel it beneath our feet. The rivers still speak, but we no longer listen. The stars still move in their ancient patterns, but we have forgotten how to read them. The earth still offers balance, but we chase control. Yet somewhere in us, that old wisdom sleeps, quiet but unforgotten. It stirs when we stand barefoot on soil, when we pause to watch a bird in flight, when we breathe in the scent of rain. It reminds us of what we once knew by heart, that to live is to participate, not to possess. Our ancestors did not call it knowledge. They called it life, a sacred exchange, to take, to give, to thank, to move on. They survived not because they conquered nature, but because they learned to converse with it, to walk lightly, to understand that the earth does not belong to us, we belong to the earth. And that simple truth, whispered in wind, carved in stone, painted on cave walls, is the greatest inheritance humanity has ever received. The fire has burned low. Its glow fades softly across the ground, gold to amber, amber to ash. Outside, the wind carries the smell of rain. The night is quiet again, as it was in the beginning. Somewhere deep in that silence, the story of our species lingers, whispered in the smoke, buried in the earth, written in the stars. We have walked a long path since that first dawn, from stone to steel, from cave to city, from whispers beside the fire to signals pulsing through satellites that circle the sky. We have crossed oceans, split atoms, touched the moon, but as the light of our inventions grows brighter, our connection to that original fire, the one that warmed our ancestors, the one that taught us humility, grows dimmer. And so, as the flames of the Paleolithic fade, we are left to ask, what have we carried with us, and what have we left behind? Our ancestors lived in rhythm with the world. We live in defiance of it. They took only what they needed. We take without measure. They followed the seasons. We have silenced them. They saw the earth as a companion. We have made it a resource. And yet, beneath all our progress, the same pulse still beats. The same need for belonging, warmth, meaning, connection. We have built skyscrapers, but still gather around small circles of light. A screen, a lamp, a fire, searching for the same comfort our ancestors once found in flickering flame. Technology has changed everything except our nature. We are still hunters, though our prey is now time itself. We are still gatherers, though we collect data instead of fruit. We are still storytellers, painting our modern caves with light. But somewhere along the way, we forgot to listen. The land that once taught us now cries out in exhaustion. Forests shrink, oceans choke, air grows thin. We have become deaf to the very teacher that shaped us. We call this the Anthropocene, the age of humans, but perhaps it is better named the age of forgetting, because what we have forgotten is not knowledge, but reverence. The humility of knowing we belong to something larger than ourselves, the gratitude that once turned survival into song. The story of the Paleolithic is not a story of the past. It is a mirror held up to our present. It shows us what we once were, not to romanticize but to remind. They lived with less, yet saw more. They possessed little, yet left everything that matters: fire, language, art, empathy, memory. In their simplicity lies wisdom, the understanding that progress without balance is peril, and knowledge without care is emptiness. They knew, perhaps better than we do, that the earth gives and takes in equal measure, that nothing we build lasts forever, except the way we treat one another and the world that carries us. Prehistoric. When we look back through time, through ice and ash, through stone and shadow, we can trace the line of our becoming, the dawn of fire, the patience of the hunt, the tenderness of care, the creation of art, the rhythm of song, the balance with earth. Each step brought us here. Each lesson was a gift, but every gift demands remembrance. And remembrance requires responsibility. If those early humans could see us now, what would they think? The species that once lived in harmony with rivers now dams them. The creatures who honored animals now cage and consume them without thought. The children of the wind who once read the stars now blot them out with light. And yet, they might also marvel at our courage, at our curiosity, at the way we still reach upward, still wonder, still dream. Because the fire that burned in their caves burns still, not in hearths, but in hearts. It is the same spark that drives us to heal, to create, to love, to rebuild. It has never gone out. It only waits for us to remember how to tend it again. The question now is not whether we are more advanced than our ancestors. It is whether we are wiser. We have gained the power to shape the world, but lost the patience to understand it. We speak to one another across oceans, but often forget how to listen to the silence of our own planet. We rush where they observed, we consume where they conserved, we dominate where they belonged, and yet all is not lost. Because inside each of us lives that same ancient instinct, the one that knelt before the fire, watched the stars, and whispered thanks to the wind. We have only to remember it. To remember is to slow down, to breathe, to notice, to feel the ground beneath our feet, the same ground they walked on, to watch the sky they watched, to let awe return. Every act of attention is a kind of homecoming. Every moment of wonder is a bridge across time. When you pause to listen to rain, when you look up at the moon, when you walk among trees and feel their quiet intelligence, you are speaking the old language again. You are answering a call that has echoed for 2 million years. The story of humanity has always been a dialogue between fire and forest, between need and gratitude. We have the chance now, perhaps the last, to restore that dialogue, not through guilt, but through remembrance, not through despair, but through humility. To live again as our ancestors did, not in their hardship but in their reverence. To rebuild not their world but their respect for the one we share. This is not a call to return to caves or abandon progress. It is a call to rediscover our belonging, to carry the wisdom of the past into the possibilities of the future, to balance what we can make with what we must preserve. Perhaps that is the true legacy of the Paleolithic. Not the tools or the art or the fire, but the lesson that everything sacred begins small. A spark, a song, a circle of warmth against the dark. We have built entire civilizations on those beginnings, and if we are to endure, we must protect them in our cities, our hearts, our choices. Every gesture of care, every hand that plants a tree, every voice that speaks with kindness, every effort to restore what has been lost is an echo of that first act of human wisdom, to nurture life rather than consume it. So let this be our remembering. Let us look at the earth not as a resource, but as kin. Let us look at one another not as competition, but as company on a shared road. Let us look at the stars not for conquest, but for context, to remember how small we are and how beautiful that smallness can be. Because the story of humanity was never about domination. It was about connection. And every time we honor that connection, we reignite the fire that made us who we are. I sometimes wonder, as I tell these stories across the quiet hum of the present, where are you as you listen? What time of day is it in your part of the world? Is the sun just rising as it did for them, Or is it setting, casting long golden light through your window? Wherever you are, whatever moment you inhabit, know this: you are part of the same story. Your breath, your heartbeat, your wonder, they are continuations of a rhythm begun 2 million years ago. The Paleolithic has never ended. It lives in the pulse of the earth, in the kindness we offer, in the fire that still burns when night falls. So take this story with you. Let it remind you to walk gently, to see deeply, to listen well. Let it remind you that we are not apart from history. We are history, still unfolding. And if it touches something in you, that quiet curiosity, that ancient longing, share it. Keep it alive. Because every time we remember who we were, we give the future a chance to begin again.